Bueno, muy buenas noches a todos. En nombre de PwC les damos la bienvenida a su casa. Quisimos acompañar la visita que hace nuestro sponsor internacional, el señor JJ Sutherland, y no quisimos dejar pasar la oportunidad de, como Price, estar en ese gran momento. Sabemos que viene en un par de días, que es muy limitado su tiempo, y le queremos agradecer por las 2 horitas que nos va a brindar en este momento. Igualmente, pues esperamos que disfruten de sus comentarios, puedan hacer las preguntas que bien tengan, y pues sin más antesala presento directamente a Fabián. Fabián hace parte de uno de nuestros aliados que representa Casmena, y a través de Fabián también hemos trabajado con JJ en esta oportunidad. Entonces, Fabián nos va a dar una serie de instrucciones iniciales de cuál va a ser la dinámica y procederemos. Muchas gracias por estar acá nuevamente.
Hola, buenas noches. Entonces, primero les quiero presentar a JJ. JJ empezó a trabajar inicialmente en el sector de tecnología. De pronto se aburrió un poquito y se fue a ser jornalista y cubrió casi todos los últimos guerras importantes que tuvimos en el mundo. Y de hecho también aplico entonces Scrum en este entorno, que es una experiencia muy interesante. Y ahora trabaja con su papá Jeff Sutherland en la empresa Scrum Icc, que son los líderes mundiales en Scrum. Y Jeff Sutherland, de hecho, es el fundador de Scrum. Entonces, pues primero una bienvenida a JJ. Y segundo, tenemos el libro que escribió junto con su papá para hacer una pequeña rifa, si quieren. Entonces vamos a pasar unas tarjetas con Scrum, donde tienen una explicación con Scrum y un correo. Entonces, si escriben a este correo solo su nombre completo, al fin de la charla vamos a por random elegir alguna persona que va a ganar un libro firmado por JJ. ¿Listo? Entonces, con eso voy a pasar la palabra a JJ.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. So, yo siento para mi español es muy mal. So, I'm going to talk in English. And I apologize in advance. My daughters both speak Spanish. They go to a bilingual school in the United States. It's Spanish and English, and they refuse to speak to me in Spanish because my Spanish is so bad. My daughter's 3, and she's made that decision. So, I thought I would just start with where Scrum came from and how I got involved in it, and sort of where I'm seeing it move in the future in a few case studies. So, first of all, I want to thank Pricewaterhouse for hosting this event. It's very generous of them, and I appreciate it. And thank you, Fabian. The reason I'm here in Bogotá is Fabian and I met at a conference, and he convinced me to come down to Bogotá. So that's why. So thank you very much. So as Fabian said, I did some work in software in the early 90s, and then I became a journalist. And I spent most of my time in war zones, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, all the really fun parts of the world. I did that for about 8 years. But when I was in Iraq in 2006, 2007, it was at the worst part of the war for the United States. They were losing the war. And there were more than 100 attacks each day on US forces. And that made Baghdad very loud. There were car bombs multiple times a day. And so I kept on seeing blown up Humvees or trucks everywhere just littering the streets. And when I went back to the United States, I was covering the Pentagon, the Defense Department of the United States, and my editor asked me, what happens to all of those blown up Humvees? You know, what happens? And I said, I don't know, let me find out. So I did. They ended up at the Red River Army Depot, which is in this part of the United States called Texarkana, Texas, which is one of those places where there's a lot of nothing. It's a huge, huge flat plain with nothing. And there were, just Humvees, blown up Humvees as far as the eye could see when I visited there. And at that point, the U.S. Army was spending $17 billion a year in repairs. And what had happened was when the war started, this Army depot, which was mainly civilians, could fix about 3 Humvees a week. And they were going to be closed down by the government because they said we need a lot. We're getting 100 blown up every day. We need a lot more than 3 a week coming out of you. We're going to shut you down and outsource it to another company, to a private company. And so the commander of the depot went to Toyota and to Ford and said, well, how do you do it? And what he did is instead, he introduced a lean manufacturing line at the Red River Army Depot. And if you've never seen one of these, find a friend who has a lean manufacturing line access and go, because it's really magical. You see all these robotic arms are sort of swooping through the air, and the part just shows up the right time to attach the door. And it's just really incredible. And what they did was, instead of fixing the Humvees, they actually took them apart to the last nut and bolt. And so they recreated, they were building them from scratch, just using the parts that were salvageable. And they went from 3 a week to 40 a day. And that, I thought, was pretty impressive. And then, because I don't know how many thousands of % improvement that is, but it's a lot. And the government decided not to shut them down. And what really impressed me the most, so every 16 minutes a Humvee would run off the line. What impressed me the most was, it was the system that changed, not the people. They didn't have any different people. It was exactly the same people. And these are people who were not that well educated, probably a secondary school education in the United States that went right into working at this plant. And so that really stuck with me. And I called up my father, who I'd sort of, he was doing the Scrum process improvement thing, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm off doing other stuff. I was like, I think you might be on to something. And then, and what really struck me is that the people changed so much because it used to be sort of this antagonistic relationship between the union that was making the things and then the management. And they actually put the sticker, you can see on it, and it says, we build it as if our lives depend on it, theirs do. And they put that inside of every Humvee they repaired. And they had a 800 number, a toll-free number that any soldier across the world could call. And they manned a call center 24 hours a day, total volunteers that would answer that call and tell them if there was a problem with their Humvee, how to fix it. So that really, they obviously got involved, and they felt a sense of purpose in what they were doing. And so then I started using Scrum at the Baghdad Bureau as the Baghdad Bureau chief a little bit, just making work visible. And then it really happened here at in Tahrir Square. I was sent in because there were multiple. It was a big deal. The Arab Spring was a big story at the time for us. And so we had 4 reporters, a bunch of producers, translators, drivers, and it was a total mess. Everyone was fighting with each other. No one was agrees. It might surprise you that broadcast correspondents have egos and don't get along with each other. And so I went there, and I land in the Cairo airport in the middle of the night, and it's blacked out. You can't leave the airport because there's a dusk to dawn curfew, and everyone's fleeing at this point. All these tourists in the airport trying to get out. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I knew all these people individually. I'd worked with them over the years. How am I going to get them to work together? And the only thing I thought is, I'll use Scrum. And so what I did is I just did exactly, I started putting posts. I didn't tell them it was Scrum. They wouldn't want management, they don't want management philosophy. They just want, they're journalists, they're above that. But I just put sticky notes on the wall. What are we going to do today? Who's going to cover Tahrir Square? Who's going to go interview Mubarak's son? Who's going to do this? And all of a sudden, just by making the work visible on the wall and talking about it, all of a sudden people started cooperating and helping each other out. And so when I really thought about that, and that year I did the Arab Spring, and I did the tsunami in Japan, and I did the war in Libya, and I ran all of those coverages for NPR, which is sort of like BBC, the BBC in America. And so the reason why that worked, so we had these 12-hour sprints. So these sprints were 12 hours long because we had a morning broadcast and an evening broadcast that we had to do, 12 hours apart. We had a retrospective twice a day, and this is something that's sort of core to Scrum, which is looking not only at what you're doing, but how you're doing it. How are we working today? How can we work better? And what's getting in our way? What's slowing us down? And in our case, it could be something, the satellite dish is messing up. It's hard to connect. Or, the secret police picked up one of my recording teams. That slows down our ability to report, so we got to get them out of jail. Things like that. And then, we had to respond to change. And this is what, Scrum is about, is responding to change, because events were changing so fast that we would spend a whole day reporting something, and then something would happen to Tahrir Square, and we had to throw away our entire plan. And that was one of the things that Scrum taught me is, don't fall in love with your plan. And we were a small team. This is the other part about Scrum is that you want a small team of people doing the work. 5 to 9 usually. It's about the right size. Otherwise, when teams get bigger than that, everything just slows down. And we were autonomous because the government of Egypt kept on shutting down the internet and shutting down the phone networks and things like that. We couldn't really talk to Washington, D.C., where our headquarters was, except my satellite phone, which is really expensive. It's like $12 a minute. And so those conversations were short. And so they just told us what to do, but we decided, what stories they needed for the broadcast, and we decided how we were going to do them, how we were going to execute upon that. And again, just like those workers at River, we had a sense of purpose, because we were all war correspondents, and I certainly expected it to turn into a bloodbath. And it didn't. There was a peaceful revolution that toppled a dictator. Egypt hasn't turned out that great in the years since, but at the time, it was this amazing story of a peaceful revolution. And as a result, we won basically every major journalism award that year. And so what that sort of brought me, and I started at that point starting to move away from journalism, writing books about Scrum. It was interesting to me. And getting shot at gets old. But the basic idea about Scrum is sort of, you divide and conquer. You divide the work into small pieces. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? You need, one piece at a time, one bite at a time. You don't have this huge thing. And then you divide time into small pieces of time. And in Scrum, that's 1 to 4 weeks. That's a sprint. And then you'd have the small teams, as I mentioned. And then you inspect and adapt. And that's the key thing about Scrum. You're looking at what you're building. You're showing it to your customer or to whoever is getting value from what you're building. And then you're getting feedback to say, okay, let's make something more valuable. Or we're making the wrong thing. Let's change. Or we're making the right thing. Let's do more of that. And then, but you're also, as well as inspecting the value, you're inspecting your process. How is the team working together? How can we make the team work together better? And the team decides that. There's no external force on that. There's a self-motivation by the team. And it has transparency, because just like putting those sticky notes on the wall, just making the work visible in some way, what needs to be done, who's doing what, is a very powerful thing, which is why I always encourage any Scrum team, don't use a software tool if you could at all avoid it. Just put something on the wall, because a software tool or a web-based tool, you have to go somewhere and look for it. But what you want is some sort of information radiator that you just walk into the room and you know exactly what's going on. And with that transparency aligns the teams, and everyone knows everything. So everyone knows what they need to do. And so it changes work by making it faster, because you're inspecting your process because you want to do stuff faster and deliver better stuff faster. It makes it better because you build in quality at the beginning rather than inspecting for quality at the end. It makes people happier. And it's not really a touchy-feely thing. Happy people make better stuff. They work better together. Anybody who walks in and says, work sucks, they're not going to do a very good job. So you want happy teams, and that's one of the things that Scrum is designed to do. How do we make people motivated to be there? And I'm not talking about silly happiness. I'm talking about, a sense of purpose, like a sense of accomplishment. And it makes it smarter, because by doing things as small chunks of work and delivering to the customer, you're getting the feedback from the customer. It's very hard when you're working on something for 6 or 12 months and then deliver it to the customer, and the customer says, well, that's not what I wanted at all. And you're out, all that millions of dollars you're expecting, the customer doesn't pay, which I've seen happen. So what happens is, if you have these Gantt charts, anyone here use Gantt charts still at work? And are they ever right?
No.
And are people paid to update them to make them look like they're right?
Yes.
So you're paying people to lie to you. Stop doing that. Because it's just kind of crazy, because we all know that during software development, it's very well researched, 65% of requirements change. And so people have these change control boards, and which is what you're doing is you're paying people to stop you from getting what you want. So they're lying to you and stopping you from getting what you want. So that's what happens in a traditional project management. So that's one of the things you want to do, change with Scrum. And then the other part about Scrum is that, what motivates people, why we do what we do. And far too often, we concentrate in the sort of Western business culture on the sort of extrinsic things, money, power, status, as the motivators. You want someone to do more, here's an innovation bonus. Here's a little bit more money to do it. Go be smarter and better. Be more creative, I'll give you a couple $1,000s. And the thing is, well, those motivators are real. They're not the most powerful levers to pull. Interesting, there are a lot of research is the most thing you can do with money is pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. Because they're not always thinking about it. And then what people are motivated by is autonomy, a sense of autonomy, like they're self-directed. People like to be self-directed. They don't like to be told what to do every moment of their day. We're really motivated humans, and this is just humans. Humans are also motivated by a sense of mastery, getting better at something. If you get better and you become a master of your craft, people really enjoy that. That's a motivator for people. And again, the sense of purpose. Because just as much as we're profit maximizers in companies, we're people are purpose maximizers. They want to feel like they're doing something that's bigger than just them. It's more important than making widgets or digging ditches and filling them back in again. That there's something they're contributing, that they're making a world a better place or doing something of impact. And so that's sort of how I think about Scrum sort of in a nutshell. And so I thought I'd just go through how Scrum came to be, which was in the early 1990s, 1993, 1994. My father was working at a company and they were told they had to completely redo a product line in a very short period of time. And they said, there's no way we can do this if we work the same way we have. So we have to come up with a new way of working. And one of the things they did, this is a robot called Genghis Khan, which is in the Smithsonian. It's the first robot made by iRobot. They make the Roomba and all sorts of things now. And my father was in a startup in this company where he was developing Scrum, and he rented some office space to some grad students from MIT who were making these robots, and these robots would escape. And they had little heat sensors, so they'd chase people around the office. And so he said, eventually the professor, this man named Professor Rodney Brooks came over, and he says, Professor Brooks, how does this work? And Professor Brooks says, after 30 years of MIT, we've been trying to make an artificial intelligence. And the best we can come up with is a smart chess program. And he said, and that was not the goal. And he said, no matter how big the database is and how many rules we write, it can't do anything. So he says, what I've done is I make the world the database. So in this robot, each leg has a chip that knows how to move a leg. In the spine, there's a chip that knows how to coordinate legs. And in the head, there's a neural network chip that can say, this is the way to go. And so he says, let's look at this. And he plugs the neural network chip in, and the robot starts sort of flailing around. And then it's like watching a toddler learn how to walk. And within a minute or two, it's running around the room. And Professor Brooks said, each time you turn it on, it learns to walk for the first time. From a simple set of rules, it figures out how to walk. And as my father tells the story, he said, well, what if I did that with people? Professor Brooks says, why don't you try it? Let me know. So he did. It's called Scrum. Very interesting. Professor Brooks' most recent company makes this robot called Baxter, and we're working with them because they do Scrum. So the other thing that was going on right now at that point in the early 90s was they were doing supercomputer modeling of evolutionary, how things evolved. And they were doing this at Harvard. They were doing some of the first supercomputers at a company called Thinking Machines. But what they figured out is that things don't change gradually. And any complex system actually moves from a steady state to a steady state. There's almost a quantum leap. In evolution, they started calling it punctuated equilibrium. And there's the thing that they said is, with a flying squirrel, for example, there are about 6 or 7 different changes that need to happen at once to make it from a squirrel that can crawl to a flying squirrel. And what happens is you don't really see it. It's not like there's kind of a flying squirrel, then a little bit more, then a little bit more. It's like there's normal squirrel, and all of a sudden the stuff is changing in the background, in the DNA. And then one day, boom, squirrel flies out of the tree. And that's how complex systems work. And so that's what we want to do with our teams. It's sort of like people are a very complex system, and how teams work is a complex system. And it moves from steady state to steady state. That's what you want to think about. They move from one place to another place. There's not a lot of gradual nature. You do a lot of changes under the hood, but all of a sudden, bang, it pops out. Another thing you had to deal with in designing Scrum is something called Conway's Law, which is basically an organization can only make things as a copy of the communication structures of that organization. The classic example is if you have 4 teams working on a compiler, you will have a 4-pass compiler. Or, so if you make things, if your organization is rigid and hierarchical, the products you build will be rigid and hierarchical, hard to change, hard to update. So you have to change the way you're organized in order to change how you're making what you're making and what you're making. Your organizational structure determines what you're capable of making. Another thing is Brooks' Law, which is one of my favorite laws, which is you add people to a project that's late, it only gets later and more expensive. And they did they modeled this, and they looked at a bunch of companies. And so if you, in this slide, you say if it takes about, if you have 2 people on a team on the same size project, it takes about 10 months to do. Sorry, those numbers aren't bigger. And it costs about this. 4 people get a little bit quicker, costs a little bit less. 6 people cost less, a little bit shorter, costs a little bit more. Around 10 people, it takes longer than if only 2 people were doing it, and it's 4 times as expensive. And the reason for this is communication pathways. You bring someone new onto the team, what happens? The team slows down because they've got to bring that person up to speed. But plus then if you have 10 people or 20 people or 30 people on a team, well, the team can't communicate. They can't talk. They can't have everyone knows everything because there are thousands of communication pathways. And the third thing Scrum is meant to deal with is Peter Drucker's cuckoo effect. Peter Drucker was probably the foremost management thinker of the 20th century. And he says, any foreign innovation will spur in an organization an immune response to crush that innovation, even if it's better. I know when I was at NPR, I actually was that a couple of times. Like crush the new idea because it's not the way we've done things. And that's just the way organizations work, and the way people work. And so when you're introducing something new, you really have to protect against that and watch for it and be aware of it because that happens. That's just the way people work. So when they were thinking about these things in 1993, and they had this problem they had to do, they looked through all the literature on how software teams worked, how teams in general worked, et cetera, and they found this one paper called The New Product Development Game. It was published by the Harvard Business Review in 1986. And what they were looking at were the different ways that the best teams in the world were looking at, these 2 Japanese professors, Professors Takeuchi and Nonaka. And they looked at, what happened was, Fuji Xerox had gone in the 70s to NASA. This is like when NASA was putting men on the moon, so they're like, they must be doing something right. And they said, well, how are they working? And they would have these sort of silos. They would have years and years of requirements writing. Then there's this big document passed off to another team. There would years and years of design, who would pass it off to another big document to another team. It would be years and years of engineering, and then years and years of testing. Then it blows up the pad. They got to start over. But what Fuji Xerox did is they took it back to Japan and they tried this, and it was a complete failure. And they said, and they had been trained by a man named Edwards Deming after World War II. A man named Edwards Deming trained the founders of Toyota, Sony, Honda in what's root cause analysis. And it was very important. Find what is the root cause of the problem so it never happens again. And they found the root cause was those big documents that were being handed off. And so they said, okay, no more big documents. We're going to have the teams work face to face as it moves through the phases of development. And so Takeuchi Nonaka said that was pretty interesting. And then they found that the best teams, though, at Honda, Canon, 3M, Toyota, they were always doing everything. Each team were doing a little bit of requirements, a little bit of design, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of execution, a little bit of testing, all at once. They had all the skills necessary on one team. And it reminded these professors of the scrum formation in rugby, which is how they put the ball back into play. When everyone gets together, links arms, and pushes in one direction. So that's where the word scrum comes from, is this paper. And then they said, well, what are the characteristics of these teams, of the best teams in the world? And they said they had 3 that they identified were in common. The first is they had these transcendent goals. They were given a goal that was bigger than themselves by leadership. Like the Toyota Prius team, when they built the Prius, they said, you know, our industry, the automotive industry, is destroying the atmosphere. We've got to fix this. We want to get a car that gets double the gas mileage of any car we've ever built, and we want to deliver it in 18 months, which is half the time we've ever delivered a car. What do you think the Prius team said when leadership said that to them? They said, you're crazy. And leadership said, well, go figure it out. And they came back and they said, well, there's 5 technologies that we don't have. So leadership said, fine, we'll buy those 5 companies. And they did it in 18 months. They had the Prius out. And they had this sense of purpose. I've been talking about the sense of purpose is really important to people. And again, the idea of autonomy, of self-direction. Because when you have a team, you want those people, the reason you've hired them is because they're smart, creative people. Why restrict it and box it in? You want that to come forth. And you can't do that by telling them what to do every day. And the third is cross-fertilization, which is the sort of idea of cross-functionality where sort of everyone on the team is constantly learning from each other. And so there's no one person on the team that can only do one task. We talk a lot about T-shaped people where you might have deep knowledge in one area, but you can help out in a couple of others. Because if one person can only do one thing, they're a single point of failure. And what happens if they quit tomorrow and go work for your competitor? Or get hit by a bus, and your team stops because that person is critical. There's a single point of failure. That's really expensive. The whole team can't work because you're missing one person. That's pretty crazy. And so what you really want is sort of this sort of fractal enterprise of small teams. And this is sort of how Scrum works. Like each of these sort of circles here might be a Scrum team, and this might be a virtual team or a Scrum of Scrums, where like the Scrum Masters go. And this might be another virtual team. And so it's not a hierarchical system, it's a fractal system. And this is, interestingly this is the way the internet works. You know, this might be, you know, government mapping data from the satellites, and this might be Google Maps on top of the government mapping data, and this might be, you know, Zillow putting housing pricing data on top of the Google Maps data. But none of them talk to each other except through a stable interface, like an API. They know how to interact. And that's how your teams need to know how to interact. What is the standard API for interaction between your different teams? So, and then I want to talk about Agile, because I know there's a sort of confusion, like there's Scrum and there's Agile, and what does that mean? And Agile is different, because Agile came about in 2001, 8 years after Scrum was developed. And it was 17 people gathered at a resort in Utah, in the United States. It's a ski resort. And there was all these people who were doing something different, these lightweight production methodologies. There was people from Scrum, people from something called XP, from something called DSDM, I mean, all sorts of different people. And they argued for the first day. There's a bunch of egos, of course, in the room as well. And so the first day, the 17 people argued. And one of the guys had brought in, it was all guys, of course, at that point, had brought in this book, Agile Competitors and Virtual Organizations, which is about hardware companies, about automotive suppliers. And then what it says is and it said Agile goes beyond lean, which everyone was doing lean, and that it brings the customer into the design process. But they pointed out to do that requires major changes in organization, management philosophy, and operations. And everyone said, okay, well, we can call whatever we're doing. We don't know what it is. We can't agree on anything. We'll call it Agile. So that's where the word Agile comes from. Then the next day, at the morning break, there were 17 people, 9 of them went on the ski slopes, and 8 people stayed in the room. And they wrote this Agile manifesto in about 15 minutes. And so it would be a shame if we walked out of here and didn't agree with anything. And the Agile manifesto is just a statement of values, which is they value the things on the left more than the things on the right. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Not that you might not have processes and tools, but we value individuals and interactions more. We value working product over comprehensive documentation. You might probably still do need some, but you want just enough. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So all Agile is a statement of values. Scrum is a way to operationalize that. There are other ways. I think Scrum's the best, but I work for a company called Scrum Icc. What do you expect? But so that's Agile and the Agile Manifesto. And they sort of just put it on a website and didn't think anything about it. There's a static page. And they're like, I don't know what's going to happen with this. And it has changed. I've interviewed all of them, and it has completely changed their lives, this meeting. And they had no idea. They had no idea what was happening. It was like a message in a bottle. And so what happened is it encouraged people just to take these values and do these really amazing things. This is Joe Justice, who I work with at Scrum Inc. And he started this group called WikiSpeed that builds cars with Scrum. And it's all volunteers. And it was one guy in a garage for an X Prize, an automotive X Prize, to get a car that could make 100, do 100 miles to the gallon and win a speed race. And so he did it. And it was one guy in the garage that started blogging about it. All of a sudden, but he did it with Scrum. People just started coming. And the backlog was visible. And now it's, 175 people in 20 countries. I actually think this is probably, it's probably more than that, building these cars with Scrum. And what it does is it encourages just doing it. Like, don't overplan. If you want to start Scrum, don't think about, we got to have the plan for our transition to Scrum. Just do it. Because boldness has power. This boldness alone has power. And so where I'm seeing this is, in very broad-ranging industries. So in the Netherlands, there's something called EduScrum, where they're using Scrum as the pedagogical method, how they teach the kids. And this is, I was there, and this is in a normal, high school in the Netherlands. There's no difference between it, people from different classes. It's a public school, and the people who are taking these classes with Scrum are, getting better grades, like 20% better grades than the kids who aren't. And it's just really amazing to see them, because the bell rings. I was there with a chemistry teacher who introduced Scrum into the school. And the bell rings, and I'm not sure if anyone remembers high school chemistry. I barely remember it because it was so boring. But it was, they come in, and all of a sudden the kids just start to work by themselves. And they put up their Scrum boards, and let's get to work. And the teacher goes, see, the kids run it. They're the ones who are trying to learn, or want to learn. I'm here to help them, give them the backlog of the learning. But you give the power to the individuals rather than it's people over the process. There's also a project in Uganda by the Grameen Foundation, and what they're doing is they're building apps and services for really poor, rural Uganda is one of the poorest areas on the planet. And so they're delivering these mobile apps to these farmers that's giving them access to disease databases. So they take a picture of one of their crops has a disease, and then it says, oh, it's that disease, this is how you treat it, with the resources you have on hand. You don't have to buy these expensive, medicines or whatever. And then it also gave them access to the pricing data from the market town, 4 or 5 day walk. And of course, the middleman had been giving, the market data is maybe 1,000, shekels or whatever they use as currency in Uganda, I don't know. And they were getting, 300. And all of a sudden, there's this woman who's interviewed with us, and they said, they've allowed me to negotiate 600 instead of 300 with the middleman, because I knew the pricing data, because everything became transparent. And I was talking to the people at the Grameen Foundation. They said they do it all with Scrum, and not just the app development, but all the project development as well. So that's really an interesting. Found it impressive that they were doing that. And they said again, what made it really powerful was making the work transparent. They said it used to be they'd have these Monday morning meetings that lasted for hours, that were really just pointing at who was at fault for why things aren't working. Anyone have meetings like that? I certainly have. And it was like what the Scrum did is allowed them to expose the work and then see where the constraints were. And it's usually, again, it's not about the people, it's about the process. And in the state of Washington, which is a province within the United States, they've gone so far as, and we worked with them because in their law was waterfall requirements, was traditional project management, reporting on progress. So we had to write a new law. And we got a new law passed last spring in the state of Washington that allowed Agile projects. Because they said, if we don't do Agile, knowing that we know, and there's, state of Washington is where, it has Seattle in it, so it's where Microsoft is based, Amazon, so they're a very technological state. And they said, we know, and all those companies use Scrum and use Agile processes. And they said, if we know that we can do things in half the time, it's almost unconscionable that we're spending taxpayer money insisting that it's being done a different way, that we know is more inefficient. And responding to change over following a plan, the other Scrum companies I've been looking at recently are, some of them are Tesla, the electric car company, and SpaceX, both owned by Elon Musk. And SpaceX is pretty interesting because they have a backlog and they're constantly changing what they're going to do. They have the vision. The vision is we're going to put people on Mars. We're going to live on Mars. That's a purpose you can get behind, right? That's pretty cool. But they know that they have to constantly change their plan to get there. And they've had failures. They've had things blow up on the pad. But instead of looking for who to blame, they say, let's look at the system. How do we change what we're doing? How do we change our plan? Another place I've been working with Saab Aerospace in Sweden. Recently, we have a paper coming out in about a month or so. And sort of on the left is the F-35, which is the new fighter plane from the United States, which is probably the worst project in the history of humanity. It costs $1.5 trillion. And that is a lot of money. Still can't fly. And the one on the left, and so each copy grew from 273 million to 337 million. And that's a lot of money per copy of the plane. Well, on the right is the Saab Gripen, which they developed with Scrum, both hardware and software. Brand new airframe, brand new software, brand new radar, brand new weapons, all with Scrum. They did it for about $15 billion, and it's 20% of the cost of the F-35. It's not a total apples to apples comparison because the F-35 has stealth technologies, which the United States doesn't share with anybody. But other than that, they're pretty much the same. They're strike fighters. So they did it really with Scrum, and it's interesting. So at 7:30 in the morning, all the Scrum teams meet at Saab, and then at 7:45, daily Scrums are 15 minutes long. 7:45, there's the next level, Scrum of Scrums, and then all the issues go up to that the Scrum teams had. Then at 8, there's the Scrum of Scrums, and the issues that couldn't be resolved at a lower level go up to that. Then at 8:15, another. Then at 8:30, the senior management sits down, and all the problems that couldn't be resolved at a lower level land in their daily Scrum. And their job is to make all of those problems go away by the next time they meet the next morning. So this coordinates about 5,000 people in an hour. This happens every day. Another company we've been working with is John Deere. They make tractors and harvesters and seeders and things like that. And they have this innovation network where they're supposed to take new ideas and for new designs and put them into production. And that's what their real problem was. They would have new designs, but they couldn't get them into the manufacturing. And they're really having a problem with that. And they're located across the planet. They have 5 centers across the planet: Brazil, Moline, in Europe, India, and China. And they really were having a problem. So they adopted Scrum in a very distributed fashion across all 5 centers, and were able to have a really change. They had amazing, they went 4 to 8 times faster to market. But it's also to say, but it was value driven rather than process driven. As I said, one of the big changes was focusing on value of what they were delivering rather than how they were delivering it. They said it was transparent because we would fail fast, and they made it easy to see what was happening rather than sort of testing late and no one knowing. And it changed these teams from being low engagement to high engagement. People wanted to be there. They're the innovation center. They're doing cool stuff. They're making a difference. And again, that sense of purpose. And it became a learning organization. And it really, just became faster than the rest of the organization. It's really remarkable to see what's happening at John Deere. So this is data from the Standish Group about success rates. This is tens of thousands of projects across the planet of waterfall versus agile, 2010 to 2015. And the main reason you want to go not do waterfall is this: 29% of waterfall projects are complete and total failures. Nothing delivered. In the software project, not a line of code used. And only about 10% of agile projects are. So having a third less failure, if you're looking at just risk management, that's what you want to do. And then again, it's 4 times as likely to be a success, which is on time, on budget, customer value delivered. But what's interesting though, there's still about half of Agile projects are over budget, late, didn't meet the customer value, mediocre teams. Because Agile is not a magic bullet. It doesn't just do it. It's a way for you to iterate your organization to being successful. But just be wary, because there's a lot of bad Agile out there. There's a lot of bad Agile. And so being good at it takes discipline, and it takes focus, and it takes commitment from the organization. Not just, oh, now we're going to do daily scrums, we're Agile. It actually requires knowledge, learning what it means, how to do it. It takes training. So it really is, it's not, I really want to communicate tonight is that it's not easy. And the only reason to change, like if you're totally happy with how your organization works right now, and all your customers are happy, and nothing's a problem, and you're making a lot of money, don't adopt Scrum. Like, why would you do that? Change is hard. Change is really hard. But if your competitor is doing Scrum, and they're starting to be able to innovate faster than you are, they're going to beat you. They're going to beat you. Because it's a famous quote often attributed to Darwin. It's not actually Darwin. It's another professor. It's like, it's not the most intelligent, it's not the strongest species that survived, nor the most intelligent, but the one that can fastest adapt to change. My daughter, my older daughter just graduated from first grade. Graduated. Felt big to me. And she was telling me, Papa, the pandas, they're dying out. I'm really sad about that. And I said, yeah, they are. And the reason why is because their environment is being destroyed by for various reasons. But the pandas can only survive in a very specific environment. Outside of that bamboo forest, undisturbed bamboo forest, they die. They're hyper-localized. They can't survive in different conditions. And if your company can only survive in current conditions, in special conditions, and things change. I was working with a large oil company, one of the big 5 oil companies, and their entire company was run on the fact that oil should be at $50 a barrel. And when oil went to $30 a barrel, they didn't know what to do, because their environment changed. And that's what you need to be able to do. You need to be able to adapt to the environment. One of the best examples is, anyone remember Nokia phones? They couldn't adapt. They couldn't adapt. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Entonces ahora vamos a hacer una pequeña entrevista a JJ y de hecho Luis y su compañero van a hacer la entrevista y después tienen la oportunidad de hacer las preguntas que tienen ustedes en mente. Si todavía no han enviado el correo para el libro, tienen algunos minuticos más.
Okay, sure.
Y, bueno, la dinámica es similar, vamos a hacerlas en inglés para que podamos ganar tiempo y no las traducimos. Igual el video, hay un registro que después podremos hacer como algún trabajo de traducción para que lo puedan ver un poco más adelante. Pero por ahora las preguntas son en inglés, las hacemos a partir de esta misma presentación y de otro cuestionario que comunicamos a JJ antes, hace un par de días. Y si alguno de ustedes después de esta entrevista quiere hacer preguntas, el espacio está abierto para que lo podamos hacer.
Bueno, ante todo, darle las gracias por su asistencia. Sabemos que muchos vienen de la comunidad de Ágiles Colombia, entonces, y también agradecerle a JJ. Thank you very much for your presence here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Ágiles Colombia. Do you speak Spanish too? I listen
Muy
to you.
poquito. Muy
Muy poquito.
Yeah.
I used to say I spoke kindergarten Spanish until I had a daughter who was in
Yeah.
kindergarten and could speak Spanish.
But your wife is Latin
Yeah,
American.
mi esposa es puertorriqueña.
Okay.
And mi hijas are in a dual language
Pero?
school, the Spanish English school.
Ok. So, él está entendiendo todo lo que están diciendo. Ok. Listo. We can start.
JJ, with your presentation, we saw that there's a huge interest from you to make teams work better.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a sense in the whole community, many of us have been working with Scrum, and see that somehow culture builds a wall between the idea of what Scrum can do and what really happens, because the culture of organizations can kill Scrum very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So my first question has to do with NPR, where you try to do something very good, and you had a prize with that, a Peabody Prize, with your coverage of the war. Did NPR change its culture after the innovation of Scrum in your teams?
The short answer is no. But they started to do it in pieces. So in new program development, they do it. They iterate on, they test very quickly. So they do it there. They do it on the website, on the web production teams. And what they're starting to do, getting into the news, because journalists are the most conservative group of people I've ever known. They hate change. They hate change. They're starting to do is they'll do projects where, like, let's say they're going to make a book center page on the internet, is they'll invite one of the the literary reporter to be on a Scrum team while they develop it, and then that person will go back and sit to the desk and say, well, why don't we try this in our journalism? And it's happened with mixed success, but it's NPR is a very conservative culture, and as you said, it's very hard to drive change through a culture.
Are there any tips for that?
Two tips. First, nothing speaks louder than success. If you can find a team or a group of teams that is on a project that can be, isn't dependent on the rest of the organization, and get them really accelerating and really producing more, higher quality, faster. That really speaks volumes. That's how Scrum started. Yeah. Like there was Scrum was started as a guerrilla movement among corporations of changing the way people were doing things. The other thing is I've found, and this is pretty easy or easier these days, is getting senior leadership, because senior leadership understands it. I mean, if you can educate them, there's a great Harvard Business Review article that came out a couple months ago that we wrote. My book is a pretty good one. I wrote it for that set. And if you can get them on board, it helps a lot, because otherwise it can become very fragile. Management changes and it goes away.
Okay, many of the examples we saw are outside from the IT world, which is very exciting and interesting, but it's also meaning that somehow the manifesto needs a little upgrade. Do you think that the Agile Manifesto needs to be rewritten, or at least be viewed in a different optics from this 15 years later?
The only thing that they've changed is it was working software over comprehensive documentation. They went to working product. And when a few years ago they all got together and they said, should we update it? All 17 of them got together at Snowbird again, at the 10th anniversary in 2011. And I looked at it and I said, no, the only change is we really mean it. And the issue that they've had, I'd say, is that there's a lot of, as I was saying, there's a lot of bad Agile. There's a lot of people who claim to be Agile but are not living up to the Agile Manifesto. They've sort of mouthed the right words. A lot of very large, I won't name names, a lot of very large consulting companies and outsourcing companies and things that they say, oh, we're Agile just because that's the buzzword. And my concern actually is that they do poor Agile, and that gives Agile a bad name. Not that some of them aren't very good at it. Some of them are really good at it. But, obviously in the huge companies, it's bits and pieces here and there. But that's what I would say. I would say, actually living up to it and just replacing software with product.
So living up with it, it also means that it has to go outside from the IT teams or the team that's working with Scrum and goes to different areas in the corporate offices or the corporate world. Do you think there are areas where Scrum won't fit?
If you have total predictability and nothing is going to change in your project, absolutely nothing, you could probably plan it out without Scrum. I don't know. A friend of mine says, the Swiss are really good at digging tunnels, and you might not need Scrum for that.
I have a question.
Sure.
What is the main difference that do you think that is in the different cultures that you saw as you help to apply Scrum? Different cultures like the journalist or cultures different like automóvil. En frente a los que están haciendo IT.
Okay.
Okay, among
Different
Yeah.
domains.
Yeah.
I will totally honestly, everyone thinks they're a special snowflake.
Yeah.
And they're
my
not. They're not.
Okay.
Everyone has the same thing and the same resistance, and everyone's convinced that their situation is totally unique,
Yeah.
that no one has ever had the problems that they have. I was with this one company, a very large company, and they're like, no one understands, has ever done what we've done, that we're trying to do, and we're doing something so complicated. And you know what they're doing? Installing SAP. I think that's been done a few times before.
it is. We also sell.
They are trying to do better with Scrum right now.
SAP, yeah, they are. They're
your
very
father
good
is
Scrum.
on that project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now they do a lot of Scrum at SAP these days.
You were just telling us about the being, like the whole idea of being agile is not only having Scrum running every day or having a stand-up meeting, but having a mindset. What's your definition of an agile mindset?
A few things. The first is the constant quest for improvement. How do we get better, even if it's just a little bit better every day? How do we constantly tune the machine? Also, embracing change in a way that, like throwing away the plan, is easy. Because it's so easy to fall in love with your plan because it's so perfect. You've made it, it's so beautiful. And you fall in love with it, and what happens, and you see this over and over and over, is that even when that plan meets reality and starts failing, people stick with the plan rather than change. In companies like web startups, what Eric Ries leads startups called the pivot, is really what that is about, is being willing to change completely what you're doing at the drop of a hat, that it doesn't matter. And so I would say, the seeking improvement and the willingness to change, and also the third part is not being motivated by hierarchical rewards. I'm the VP of whatever, I'm the director of whatever, and being motivated instead by what value do I deliver to my customers. That's what the motivation needs to be. And if you're motivated by building your own internal empire and having the right title and all this other kind of, status nonsense, you're not working for delivering the most value. And if you're doing something like the Green Foundation was, or I'm working with some of the large international organizations, and they say, well, how can we change? Some UN organizations. We have no regulation, no competition, and there's no reason for us to change. And I said, well, the real reason is how many thousands of people do you want to let die this week? That's your choice.
Okay. There's also a very, I don't think it's a trend, but it's a very interesting movement, DevOps as the relation between developers and part of the business. And it seems that somehow developers are learning and also teaching. How goes that?
I think that Scrum, because it started in software, and really is a remarkable thing. And what they are learning for the business is what Scrum is designed is get the business decisions into the IT production, because that's what should drive what is being built, as the business decisions. On the other side, what the IT organizations, I've seen this in a lot of places, is driving, hey, we can be agile. We don't have to wait for everything. We can constantly iterate. We can make things better. And so even on the business side, you now see people starting to embrace it for their own operations. And so it's almost like a catalyst and a solution. All of a sudden, everything crystallizes. I've seen that happen a number of times.
I made that question because I was wondering how has Scrum impacted in your family life? Do you make Scrum for your family list or
I
homework?
I have a Scrum board in my kitchen for all the stuff I have to do. Paint, I got to fix that lock, I got, all that stuff. And my oldest daughter, she's at school, and it's like, okay, what do you got to do today? You got to brush your teeth, you got to get ready, you got to do this, you got to come home, you got to do your homework. And just making it visible is really powerful for her. And then at the end of, each day or each week, we say, okay, what went right as a family this week? Okay. How can we be a better family next week? And sort of being a demonstrative and saying, today at work, I didn't do something right. I messed up. To model for them, that's part of life. Yeah. And learning from it is the important part.
Oh, really. JJ, I think that the approach that a lot of enterprises follow to adopt a Scrum is an approach based on tactics. We need to do these ceremonies. We need to do this Scrum board. We need to do these new things. The past week were another things. But I think that that type of approach is a very low approach, the tactic approach. I think that we need to do a different approach based on a strategic approach, trying to change habits in the teams. What do you think that is the, or your best approach, strategic approach to incorporate new habits in the team, not new ceremonies, not new tactics?
What I'm concerned with most of all are the teams delivering value. Now that's the most important thing. And so when I go into an organization and say you need to change and they want to come on board, small or large, and I say the first thing we need to do is we meet with the leadership and say, why is there a company? Why is there a company? Why does this company exist? And then you meet with sort of the middle management and you say, okay, let's make a product backlog for the company from the top level down. And how do we do that? And what's the backlog? And then, and only then, once we have a clear prioritized backlog of what the company wants to do, is I bring the teams in and I say, okay, and I don't even have them be teams anymore. I say, okay, you're a bunch of people that work for this company. Here's the backlog of stuff that needs to be done. You figure out what teams need to be formed. And then against that backlog, and then I walk out of the room with management. And usually about half an hour later, I come back in, there's a bunch of cross-functional teams formed, the teams know how to do it, and they do it. So that's what is, you want to let the teams form themselves. You want to let the teams organize themselves. You want to let the teams decide how they work. Because it's not about, you should do this, you should do that. It's about, what Scrum is a framework for allowing self-organization and self-management among teams. That's what I say. I think we have about time for about one more question.
Yeah, and una pregunta más, ¿alguno de ustedes que quiera?
Okay. So, you've been talking about how leadership you need to get the buy-in from leadership to make this whole thing work. And I've seen, like in different companies, that they go to training and they hear like the whole thing and how it works in other company. And at the end, they're super happy and they say, okay, let's apply this. But then you start seeing that in real life and you keep hearing from teams saying, yeah, we do Scrum, but we don't do this or we don't do that. Like how stop or why is it happening that people keep doing Scrum but, or what else needs to be changed so they really buy in all the process and really implement it?
The reason, I have many theories about that, but the reason people do sort of Scrum but is because they're lazy. And Scrum is hard. It makes things easier eventually, but what Scrum does is make all of the problems that are there already visible. And those problems could be personality issues, those problems could be organizational issues, those problems could be a lot of different things. And when they become visible, everyone's like, Scrum causes all these problems, let's stop doing that. Let's not do retrospectives because all the problems are there. And that happens all the time. Retrospectives are usually what they stop doing first. But what you really need to do with leadership is get an agile coach in there or someone to work with them and to keep them focused and on target and say what we're going to get and show if you do it this way, you will get more value. That's what Scrum is about, delivering radically more stuff for much less. And any leadership team that's running a company that wouldn't be happy with that, often the person who's happiest with Scrum is the CFO. CFOs really like Scrum. And so it's concentrating on the value. And what happens is when people just concentrate on the process, it's like, the cargo cults. Remember in the Pacific Islands during World War II, the airplanes would come in and drop supplies. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But then after World War II, it stops. And so they built perfect replicas of airports on the beach, figuring that airplanes will come. Because they just follow the rules, they perceive rules rather than understanding what was happening underneath. And so that's what it is. And if you concentrate on delivering value, and you're able to do that faster, that's what you can do. And if you don't, and another thing is you say, listen, do you really want to be mediocre forever? Is that your goal in life? I mean, because you have a choice. I mean, people do have a choice. They can be mediocre, or they can be great. And being great is hard. It takes hard work. But it's up to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.